We are here today to acknowledge the death and to celebrate and give thanks for the life of Robert Bosanko Roach. Bob, you are here to affirm and honour your relationship with Bob and to comfort and support the family who mourn his loss. My name's Michael Dowling and I'm privileged to welcome you here today on behalf of Bob's family, whether you are joining us here in the flesh or on live streaming. If you've not already done so, I'd ask you to turn any mobile phones or other electronic devices to off or silent. I have a very striking memory of Bob in the early days of my time at Blackwood when I was getting to know people. I paid a visit to Bob in his home and rocked up in the driveway, and clearly he saw me arrive because he said, "Oh, you've got a Kia Rio, have you?" And he told me about his car, a Kia Cerato hatch. And he said, "It's not a hot hatch." Well, it didn't start that way. You see, I downloaded the set points from the onboard computer and sent them off to a performance management company in the UK, and they tweaked the settings and emailed them back. I uploaded them to the onboard computer, and now it's faster than anything else on their range. By which stage I'm looking at him going, I soon realised I was speaking to a world-class design engineer. And in fact, some of the projects that Bob shared with me that he worked on simply left me gobsmacked. You will hear much about those projects today. And in fact, one of Bob's babies, a very large 11-tonne baby, is sitting in the driveway. So you'll see that and hear about it. In those first conversations with Bob, two things became evident. One was just very, very obvious. The man had a brain the size of a planet, but the other one was that he had such an affection and love and respect for his four daughters and for their very different but gifts in the medical field. And it wasn't just their technical skills, their exquisite technical skills that he spoke of, but it was how they applied them to benefit the lives of others, giving back health, giving back mobility, sometimes even saving lives. That life-saving theme seems to resonate with some of Bob's work in that he didn't purely work in an abstract technical realm, but one in which literally the lives of others have been saved. During a number of phone calls to Bob during his time in Calvary, he impressed me deeply with how he responded to his own very serious health situation, describing very matter-of-factly and in great Bob-like technical detail exactly what was going on with his body. So too, when I visited Bob in hospital in his dying, he wasn't anxious or fearful. He gave the impression of a man who had few major regrets in his life and who was at peace in his dying. In chatting with Denise and Joe as we prepared for the funeral, I learned that Bob had been an incredibly supportive father, expressing his love for his family in a wide variety of practical ways, being willing to drop whatever was needed to help in whatever way he could. In my observation, Bob was a remarkable and an admirable man. Bob has been a long-time member of the Blackwood Uniting Church. Bob was a person of quiet faith. He was someone who didn't make a song and dance about what he believed. It would appear that Bob preferred to express his faith in what he did, how he went about his living. Let's pray. Loving God, your Son Jesus once said, "I will know my followers by their fruits." In other words, by how they bless the lives of others. Today we think of Bob, this quiet, unpretentious follower of Jesus, and we reflect on his fruits, on his legacy, which he leaves to those who loved him. As Bob's family and friends listen today to the stories about Bob, may their own memories be kindled and may their hearts be warmed by the love they shared with Bob. We pray for Bob's family as they mourn his loss. We pray that this day and in the days to come, when they experience those inevitable moments of pain, that they will also be comforted by memories of the love and the life they shared with Bob. May these memories continue to sow the seeds of gratitude within them, a gratitude that grows into a joy and a peace that passes understanding. As today we reflect on, give thanks for and celebrate Bob's life, may we have the comfort of your peace, the sense of your presence, and the assurance of the purpose of our lives. Amen. We're now going to sing a hymn played by Bob's friend and neighbour, David Shield. Please sing and be upstanding and sing Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven. We'll now hear a scripture reading selected and read for us by Bob's son-in-law, Reverend Chris Ivey.
I chose this reading from Romans because it talks about what happens when we go through challenges, and as Michael's reminded us, the times of grieving and the awesome promise that Bob knew, that Michael talked about, of our faith in one God who is always there and full of love for us. So it's a question that's asked in the New Testament by the writer Paul. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? No. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus, our Lord.
Thank you, Chris. We're now going to hear a range of tributes to Bob's life from family both in the form of words and music. So I'd invite Jo, Denise and Emma to share.
Hello. I'm reminded today, and welcome everybody, to some of the pertinent points of Dad's life, which I'm going to try and talk about. I won't be able to give everything a spot because there were so many things to talk about. But one of the things that struck me during the night actually was one of his qualities was he had very good communication skills, and he used to make sure that everyone was up to date with everyone's news. Auntie Valda, who's here today, tells me this was just like his pop, who used to drive around in his black car back in the day and tell each of the family what was going on with the other families. So that was the old version. But forward to 2021, and Dad adopted very early on new technology called emailing. So he was very avid at emailing everybody all the news and everything that he was doing, all of his design ideas. He had a very strong relationship with many people throughout the world and some very good friends in the US who may be watching today. I hope they are. And so I looked at his emails, his chain of emails, which there was many, usually probably one every day or every couple of days, about all sorts of things. And one of the last emails he sent to us before going to hospital, which was on the 24th of March, so on the 23rd of March, he forwarded some photos of a wedding that my sister had attended, a very special wedding the weekend before. And he wrote at the top of the email, "It's nice to get dressed up for a wedding." So I'm just saying how nice it is to see everybody get dressed up to come here today to farewell Dad, and we want to think of it as a celebration, even though it's a sad event. So hopefully, almost like a wedding. So Bob Robert Roach, his middle name is Bosanko. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I just want to talk a little bit about the early times of his life, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going to sort of stop, but anyway, we'll start at the beginning. It's very difficult to put 86 years plus 10 months, he was ever so precise about numbers, into a speech such as this. Dad was a highly organised and methodical man. It's going to be perhaps something that I reckon we might find in his house, that he may have written this speech himself somewhere and prepared it earlier, but here I am trying to do a very second-rate job. He possibly would have, if he'd done it, he would have emailed it to us anyway. So I'll try and elaborate on some of the aspects of his life. He was born on the 3rd of July in 1934, which was 2 years after his sister's birthday. He was born on the 4th of July, so they were very close in their birthdays, but 2 years apart. She sadly passed away some years ago, and I know he did miss her very much, and I remember his teary moments at her funeral. He was very sad at her passing. He was not often outwardly emotional, but that was one of the saddest times for him, and losing Mum, of course. Dad was born at Rose Park in a hospital which now doesn't exist, but it was an old house on Kensington Road. And the reason that he has the name Bosanko as his middle name, which is very strange, that was his father's mother's maiden name. And so his mother, I think, was sort of insistent that the family name get carried on, and that became his middle name. And his sister had a middle name called Jewel too, which was another family name. His Roach heritage from his father was from the Roach family, who were all from Cornwall in England and came to work in the Wallaroo mines and Moonta. So all of the Roaches sort of in South Australia sort of stem from that heritage, and that's very complicated. I won't go into all that. But he lived at Rose Park as a child with his mum and sister. They seemed to enjoy, from what I know, a happy and stable childhood there. His mum was a very good ballet dancer, and his auntie Esme was also a very good dancer, and his grandparents played and danced in a band called the Como Dance Orchestra. They used to tour around Adelaide playing at dance halls in the late 20s to mid-30s. They played the piano, saxophone and clarinet. They sewed and made costumes for the band, and his mum was a very good seamstress. His mum, Olga her name is, was a very keen photographer. As children, his cousin Valda recalls having to line up for every photo opportunity. She was very fussy about the children's presentation and appearance. Valda tells me a tale of Bob taking his car, when he was much older, had a car, with his mum and auntie in the car into Rundle Street on a busy day before it was the mall, and parking them and just sitting in the car watching the people, and they would critique their appearance. They had to be very well dressed. She tells me they would also go with their pop to the local football and drive onto the oval, as you did in those days, and their pop would bring a footy for the kids to kick around, but the mum and auntie would sit in the car commenting on everyone's appearances and what their choice of outfits were for the footy. I'm not sure that this transcribed into Dad's later life outfit choices. Every time he was in hospital, which used to be quite often, and most times he was only there for a short while and he went home, he was quite fond of the hospital gown, which being working in a hospital myself, Dad, is just not a good look. So when last year, during the real height of the COVID sort of epidemic, he landed in hospital, and we thought, oh no, this is not good, you know. And at that time you were only allowed to have one visitor, and as Denise had bundled him into the ambulance in her full COVID gear, what do you call it? PPE gear. She was the only person who was allowed to visit him. But seeing as I worked there, I thought I'll just sneak in. But on the way to work, I had to do a rush to Kmart to buy some actual pyjamas, and I went to the ward, pretended I worked there, snuck in and got to the end of the corridor, and he was in a bay, and I just threw him the pyjamas from the corridor, said, Dad, put the pyjamas on, get rid of the gown, it's just not a good look. I think he just thought it was saving on the washing. The hospital could do it. But nevertheless, for an occasion like this, he got well dressed, and once again, he would have loved to see everyone turning out today in their best. Where am I up to here? He was most comfy recently, though, in his red flannelette shirt with 2 pockets and trackies. Anyway, back to the early years. He commenced at Rose Park School in 1939 and enjoyed about 3 years there. Then he moved to Sydney with his mum and sister after his dad enlisted in the Air Force, because that was wartime, in 1941. His mum didn't want to stay home and not be with her husband, so off they trotted with the kids in tow to Sydney. They lived in a flat in Bondi North and walked each day to Bondi South for school, probably quite a distance. Then they were there for a short while and then moved to Cootamundra and Charters Towers. Then his dad was sent to Papua New Guinea and served in the Air Force there. He was a council worker in charge of the Adelaide City Council depot, all the works and stuff here. But because he had such good skills with radio, I think, he was enlisted in the Air Force and served in Papua New Guinea. Then after the war, they returned to Adelaide and lived with their grandparents in Rose Park. So Dad returned to Rose Park School. He was very thrilled recently to sort of get in touch with them and went to a AGM last year, and we've always remembered as children, he had a book of his grandfather's that was just this most amazing, I suppose, a textbook or school book, and he took that to the school and they were thrilled to see that. And he also, at the school, they showed him the records of the school when his grandfather and her sister were the first students at that school, and because their mother had insisted that the school be built. So he was always very proud of the fact that his grandfather was the first child at Rose Park School and that he went there as well. Auntie Valda tells me they were very clever children, him and his sister, and they used to get up to all sorts of mischief and ingenious things to keep them amused. But Dad tells us a story of Ben getting scolded as he used to play with his dad's tools and left them on the footpath where they went missing, so he got into big trouble about that. He couldn't lose the tools. Then after year 7 he went to Norwood Boys Tech, a technical high school, as his parents encouraged this as they had lived through the Depression and they thought a trade was a good idea as you would always have work, not so much academic. They didn't think the academic side of things you wouldn't always have work. In his last year, year 10, which was year 10, his parents bought a state bank home at Glenelg North and he had to catch 2 buses and a tram to school, and they were long days. He says he topped his school in maths, physics and science but was bottom in English. He says he was not very good at sport, but they had to do sport at school, so in winter he did baseball and in summer he did swimming. So once they moved to Glenelg, I think he did spend a lot of time at the beach and went on to pursue scuba diving. His dad wanted him to go and work at a place called Litchfields, but he didn't like that idea, so he got a job by his own merits at Perry Engineering at the end of year 10, for some reason he thought that was better. And so that was in January 1950 he started at Perry Engineering, but you weren't allowed to be an apprentice until you were 16 and he was only 15 and a half, so he sort of worked for half a year, then started his apprenticeship in July. He remembers the boss of the plant. There was 1,500 employees. It was a very big plant at Mile End, where the Homemaker Centre is now. He remembers the boss coming up to him and saying, "Are you new?" And it was his first day and they had a chat. His name was Frank Perry. So he worked in lots of different areas of the works. He was an apprentice machinist and spent 5 years in that workshop in all different sections, learning and going to trade school as well. I think they worked pretty hard, long hours, and then they did trade school after hours as well. He worked on lathes, milling machines, boring machines, and all sorts of different machines, which he would have loved. The machines were left over from the war years, and one by one they were replaced. In 1954, so while he was still an apprentice, he got drafted to do national service for 6 months, and he got into the Air Force, which he thought was better than going to the, because it was quicker. Some of the other ones you had to go longer, but this was getting it over quicker. So he went to Point Cook, and they did all sorts of activities and camps and things, but they worked very hard. They only had 4 weekends off, and he used to come home for the weekends. He said it was quite good fun, and you were playing soldiers, and he really enjoyed that experience. And he said it was very good because at that stage, everyone lived at home with their parents, so himself and all his other mates had to learn to sort of live out of home and eat what they were given. And that was quite, a different experience than what they'd had. Then he also started doing, when he came back, additional studies at night school, so 4 nights a week, and he was still also doing trade school. He went to the School of Mines and studying maths, and probably took about 4 years to become a design draftsman. Then during that time, at the end of his apprenticeship, he was sort of asked to go to the drawing office, which was a big part of the works at Perry's. And he went to an office and there was a vacant desk for him with a brand new drawing machine, which he was probably very thrilled about. He worked a lot, drawing and designing many projects for the mining industry, lots of different things. One of them was the ship handling conveyor system that's still there in Wallaroo, with a long conveyor belt. There's a funny story about that he was working with his colleagues there, and one of them told a joke, and their false teeth fell out. And Dad, being an avid swimmer and scuba diver, about a week later he came back with all his scuba diving gear and went down and found the teeth to give them back to him. There's a photo of him with the teeth. He also did a lot of work on a lot of silos and equipment for the mining industry all around Australia. So he was working hard. I think he worked a lot, saved a lot of money, didn't spend money. He had a car and a motorbike, and then he bought a couple of blocks of land. when he met Mum, she didn't like those blocks of land where they were, so she made him sell them and buy another one where she wanted to be, which was near her mum and her sister. He said, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, he didn't care. So during that period before he met Mum, he says he had a few girlfriends, but his friend Bill, Carmen, were great friends, and they had chatted that they needed to sort of get a bit better at how to get girlfriends, because they weren't having much luck. So they decided they had to learn to dance. So they went to a dance class in Perry Street. And then they went, I think they only probably did a couple of classes, then went to Burnside Town Hall, and they were very frightened because there was so many people there, and they were dancing and they stepped on the girls' toes. That was really embarrassing. So they thought they'd better go back and do a bit more intuition. So they went back and learnt all the dances, quick step, foxtrot, waltzing, etc., until they passed their bronze medal. And then they thought they were confident to go back. So Dad tells the story that of the last day of work was a Tuesday night after Christmas, like the break up for Christmas. They went to a dance at the Burnside Town Hall, and he liked the quick step. So he sussed out all the girls and worked out which one was a good dancer that he could ask to do the quick step, because that was always the dance after the interval. And so he picked Joan. Then he went away so he apparently had a little black book with lots of girls' numbers in it, and he rang up all the girls saying, I can't go out to dances for the next few weeks because I'm going away with my friend. And then when he came back, he went with his friend to the Snowy Mountains to check out the Snowy Mountains scheme. When he came back, he rang Joan up because she was at the top of his list, and she agreed to go out with him, and then he never rang the other girls back. I suppose that was the form of Tinder in those days. So he got engaged to Joan in November 59 and married in November 60. And as I said before, Joan didn't want to live where the other blocks of land were, so they bought a block of land at Glynde and built a house. And not just content to just sort of get the builder to build the house, Dad designed the house, drew up the house, did all plans for the house, got the builder to do a bit of the work, but he did a lot of the work himself. He did all the electrical and the painting, and probably a lot more than that. So they moved in just after their honeymoon. He tells the story of having nothing in it, which I think was very common for new homes and newlyweds in those days. They didn't have any furniture, and his friends came around for tea, and there was nowhere to sit, so he sat in his wheelbarrow, and that wheelbarrow today still sits in his yard, the same wheelbarrow. He had very fond memories of his wedding day in 1960. It was wet and it rained all day, but they had a wonderful time, and then they went on a honeymoon for 2 weeks around Tasmania. That house had many family gatherings. At some point in time, he extended that house and made it a little bit bigger and made a garage rumpus room. So I remember having lots of parties. I think my 5th and 6th birthday party in that garage, and all the family and friends coming. He tells that I helped with the concreting, which I probably did. I probably had to. I remember there was chooks. So in his work life, he kept on moving up through the ranks, getting lots of promotions, until after 11 years of being at Perry's, he was the senior design draftsman. He continued to do many projects, as I've talked about before, Wallaroo, silos, mining industry projects, and I think he was involved with the building of the Morford Street Bridge. He then had some periods of time where he travelled. In the 60s, he went to Dampier as a site manager, building iron ore buckets and large mining machinery. Also Mount Tom Price, spent quite a lot of time up there in the west, and then also went to Japan to fix an electric hydro plant that was not working. They told him, go there, fix it, and don't come back till it's working. So he loved, I think, his times travelling for work. He was really interested in people. In Japan, he learnt to speak the language, and on the weekends he used to just go out and travel because he just wanted to see all the places that were around, and he learnt to speak so he could go out into the country to see various things. One day he took a train for 4 hours there, and then he only had 2 hours there and 4 hours back, and they all thought he was mad. But he said, no, it's worth it, because I'll get to see something new and I'll learn things, which was his life of wanting to learn and discover all the time. He also went in the 70s, went to New Guinea, similar sort of thing. There was something wrong and he had to fix it, and that he went on flying in a very little plane, very scary, over the mountains. But he had a ute, and same thing, he used to go exploring in his ute whenever he had time off to learn about the culture and see the scenes and everything he could see while he was away in New Guinea. Then in 1979, for some reason, he was a little bit disillusioned with where he was working and wanted a change. And he, after looking for quite a number of years, he said it was very difficult to get positions because he didn't actually have a university degree, even though he had the skills and experience. So I think that's translated into why he's encouraged all of us to really pursue tertiary education. He went to Adelaide Steamship Company, which was down near the Port Adelaide, and they had a lot of similar sort of work, but very much to do with shipping, tugboats, and he did some work with cranes and stuff down there. And submarines too, I think. Started with working in submarines then as well. Then they, funnily enough, were bought out by a company after he'd been there about 4 years, and the company that bought them was Perry's, so he ended up back there. But he negotiated and went back as the engineering development manager, and then he had the right to do any project he wanted, what he was interested in, and get it built, which he did. So they worked on, some more work on Collins-class submarines, bomb loaders for the Air Force, Hercules aircraft, and then eventually moved on to the Bushmaster, which you'll hear about later. And during that time, obviously life was busy with kids, house, mum and dad to kids, running them around, all the things. But they did move from the house in Glynde in 1971 to Belair. This time he designed and built all of it. I don't know how he did it he had 3 children then, Linda was born there. We used to play in the paddock across the road with the cows, I remember that. And I used to think we never came home. We would go out in the start of the day and come home for tea. And I used to think, what did they do all the time when we were out? But I think I know what they did. They were building everything. He was doing all the garden. They grew everything, made everything, all done by hand. Because we were 4 girls, we had to do everything as well. At one stage during that time, he invented a saw bench, this fabulous saw bench, and he made everything, and we had to help hold the timber, feeding it through the saw bench, carry everything, make everything. So we had to just help. It didn't matter. We were girls, boys, that was not relevant at all to anything. We just all did everything. Then they stayed at Belair until 1998 when they built his house at Craigburn Farm, which again he designed and built from scratch all himself, supervising all the trades. One thing that just sort of strikes me about Dad recently, obviously he had a little romantic streak doing all those things with the girls and the dances in his youth, but I don't think we saw a lot of that throughout our life until recently. He decided that reality TV was one of his very much loves, and he got into The Bachelor, and he loved it. And he used to think that everything was real, and these people were actually, I said, Dad, it's just reality TV. I think they're just putting it on. No. He would follow all the couples, all their stories. He'd buy the new idea to find out what was happening to them 5 years later, how many babies they had, when they broke up, who they were with next. He loved it. And then that also went on to Maths, Married at First Sight, and Farmer Wants a Wife. He used to watch all of them, even the American versions. Loved it, absolutely loved it. We heard all about it. And Emma and him had a good relationship talking about all those for many years. But he absolutely loved Mum to pieces. He thought the absolute world of her, and he could never understand why she picked him. He thought the world of her. Then, yes, he also liked watching. That goes on to his love of TVs. The reality TV came in with his love of TVs. We'll probably hear more about that. But yes, he loved his big TVs and anything he could watch. So along with these romantic programs, he loved Nordic crime drama. He loved watching YouTube, educational videos, always learning, always trying to find out new ways of doing things. And he loved military and war movies, anything to do with airplanes, army, anything. He loved it. He loved inventing things. He always had solutions to everything. He fixed everything, always had a problem. If there was a problem, he could always fix it. I remember as a child, he invented some sort of beekeeping, extracting the pollen and the honey machine, and we had to go all over the countryside looking for parts and making the machine. But then he also had to try his hand at it, and he got the bee suit with the whole gear, and we did a little bit of beekeeping. He had long lists and plans of everything, some of which I'm only just discovering in the last few days looking through his house. There's notes and letters and documents about everything. He's kept it all. He had diaries of all his trips that he went overseas with, and all sorts of, everything was documented and planned. He wrote, when he was doing the Bushmaster project, he wrote pages and pages and pages of information to his colleagues and friends. We'll hear more about that later. He liked having fun. He liked going out. He liked being active and busy. He was interested in people. He liked to talk. He was interested in their life and how things worked. He loved, one of the things, some personal things for me, he loved going to see the lottery houses, the home house lottery that raised money for the hospitals. So for a long time, ever since they've had them, we would always go to see the house, and he'd ring me up, he'd go, "Joanne, there's a new house, when are we going to go and see it?" And we always had to make a date to go and see the house, and then we'd buy tickets together. But we'd always have to have lunch first at a bakery. He loved going to the bakery before we went to the house or afterwards. One of his favourite ones was Orange Spot at Glenelg. My friend Kate works there at the houses. She's always there, and we'd always go in, and she'd see me. She goes, "Where's your dad?" And he'd be upstairs looking at every aspect of the house. And then when we'd finished, we'd go and see Kate and buy our tickets. And just recently, we had a win. We won a case of wine, which I should have brought today. I forgot. We could have all shared it. He was thrilled with that. So we only found out about that when he was in hospital. One of the other little stories I'll just tell, that was when I had some difficult situation where my husband left me, and he was, at that time, I think, he was like, "Oh, I don't know how I can help her, there's all this lawyer stuff, there's all this real emotional stuff, that's not me, But then one day I said to him, "Oh, Dad, I wonder if I could make my car into 2 cars, because Emma was going to be getting her licence soon, and I decided I was on my own, so I only needed a little car. I didn't need the car that I had, which was a bit bigger." Okay. So he goes, "Cars I can do, that's no problem. We'll do cars." So he researched every car on the market, all the specs of the cars, and Emma played hockey, so she had a big goalie bag that had to fit in the car. So one Saturday morning he comes around and goes, "Come on, get the old goalie bag, come on Emma, we're going to buy a car, going to look at the cars." So we went to Ford. The hockey bag didn't fit in the Ford. We went to Mitsubishi. The hockey bag didn't fit in the Mitsubishi. All the shops. Then we ended up at Renault, and lo and behold, we walk in, and one of my dear friends, Tim, was working there as a salesman. So Tim and I hadn't seen each other for a while, having a long lost catch up in his office. And next minute he goes, "What is your dad doing?" And we looked out the office window, and Dad was out on the showroom floor, speaking to customers and telling them all about the car, all the specs, how many kilowatts it had, what the wheelbase was, and everything about the car. And Tim goes, "Oh, he's doing a very good job. He knows way more than me. We'll leave him there." And this couple did buy a car based on Dad's selling techniques. He knew it all. But anyway, so lo and behold, we ended up with 2 of those cars. The other thing that I would like to say is, during the times when I had to sell my house, he once again took up the building game, and he was there for about 12 months every day, helping me get that house ready for market. And he thought he was a teenager. He would be up in the roof, on the ladder, doing all sorts of crazy things that he shouldn't have been doing at the age he was, well and truly into his 80s. But yeah, same with having his fast red car. He always still thought he was a teenager. One story that I'm just going to finish off with, a story that Arnie Valder told me only recently about, which just sort of displays his character, I think. And this is something that in his early life then relates to his last days. She tells me that when they were little, I don't know how old they would have been, they had to go and get their teeth out for some reason at a dentist. in the city, and they went in a taxi, and it was very, a very sort of nervous and anxious day, and they had to go to the dentist and have an anaesthetic. And he was very stoic and tough, didn't complain, just took it on the chin, got the mask put on, got put to sleep, whereas Valda said she was kicking and screaming and fighting and didn't want to have it done. But she always remembers Bob being very brave and tough, and that's how he was at the end. I was with him for that last week, and it was incredible how he lived. He tried to stay here with us, but in the end, he went home to be with Mum, and he's in peace now. So thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you to each and every one of you for coming here today. It means the world to my dad. My name is Denise. I'm daughter number 2. He regularly used to call us 1, 2, 3 and 4. If he couldn't quite get to the name or something, he'd go, right, daughter number 2, you're up. And so that's why I've written that up there today. I would like to talk to you about 3 aspects of Dad's life. And the first and one of the most prominent ones, which you couldn't probably avoid if you came in the front way, is this large, shall we say, truck. And there's a story behind the word truck. That thing out there is a Bushmaster. And many of you have probably heard a little bit about the Bushmaster from my dad, but I'm here to tell you the story. Firstly, I'd like to just thank the people that made this happen. Firstly, to Hugh. When his grandfather, my dad, was dying in hospital, he recalled the story of Prince Philip and how he came to the service and went away in the service in his coffin in that Land Rover convertible. And he thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could get a Bushmaster? And so the plot of the plan started at that point. And it was really only a couple of weeks ago. When you read the stuff online about the army and getting ceremonial vehicles to come to an event, the minimum it takes is 6 weeks. You can't get it here in that time, and we did it between us all in about 6 days. So I'd very much like to thank the Army. In particular, I would like to thank Lieutenant Colonel John Daunt, the Chief of Staff of the 9th Brigade and 1027 engineers, who basically gave the tick of approval for this Bushmaster to come here today. I would also like to thank the members of the Australian Defence Force that are here today, and that's Lieutenant Kay Neagle, Warrant Officer Daniel Williamson, and Trooper Anthony Skews, most of whom were not even born at the time that the Bushmaster started its infancy. There is an army chaplain called Frank Ireland who was instrumental in also getting the Bushmaster to come to this very special event. Some of the things I'm about to tell you are excerpts from a book by a military journalist called Brendan Nicholson, who is the author of a book called The Bushmaster, From Concept to Combat, which is available online. If anybody would like a link, I can give it to them afterwards. Also, many of the things I'm about to tell you are things that I remember about the Bushmaster from its infancy when Dad was working on it, from Dad's emails and his personal stories for many times over the years. I would like to start my story about the Bushmaster not at the beginning, but in the middle. On a spring afternoon in April 2006, a convoy carrying Australian and Afghan troops grinds up a dirt road near the village of Kakarak in Afghanistan's Urizan province. The long line of vehicles is led by a 6-wheeled long-range patrol vehicle driven by soldiers from Australia's Special Air Service, or SAS, regiment, as it heads deeper into the West Dorfan district, a Taliban insurgent stronghold. The end of the harsh Afghan winter had signalled the start of the fighting season, and this is an uncomfortable place to be. The soldier manning the patrol vehicle's 50 calibre machine gun warily scans the high ground above the road for signs of ambush. The SAS contingent is followed by a mix of vehicles carrying Afghan troops and more Australians. At the rear are 3 nuggety armoured troop carriers, the Bushmasters, crewed by Australian commandos. The Bushmaster vehicles are new to the Army at this point, and the commandos are very wary of them. They enjoyed the situational awareness that came with their wide-open Land Rover patrol vehicles that they'd previously used, and they were very concerned that they'd lose all that awareness in driving in the confines of the Bushmaster. It seemed very big and put us in a box or a cage where we couldn't really react to situations, says a commando on that patrol. He was a combat medic. We thought, what is this massive thing? I'm not going in that. Everything will shoot at it. The road convoy on that day carried 30 Australians, SAS and commandos, and a 50-strong unit from the Afghan National Army, whom the Australians mentored. The line of 20 vehicles included patrol vehicles and 4- and 6-wheel motorbikes, and was tailed up by the 3 Bushmasters in that convoy. It's close to 3 p.m. when explosions and long bursts of gunfire erupt from above them. The Taliban ambushes the convoy from positions on a mountainside, high above the road, with their rockets and AK-47 assault rifles and their heavy machine guns. As they pour a barrage of rockets and gunfire down onto the soldiers below, the Taliban fighters concentrate on that soft-skinned lead vehicle, not a Bushmaster, deducing that it's the command car. The SAS machine gunner is hit between his body armour and is significantly injured. He collapses to the floor of the patrol vehicle, which is badly damaged and immobilised. The rest of the convoy fights back, aiming up into the Taliban positions, but the Afghan fighters' main target remains that stricken patrol vehicle at the lead. As the call goes out on the radio that the gunner's down and badly wounded, other Australians try to reach him on foot, but they're quickly pinned down by fire coming from multiple directions above and on their flanks. The commandos in the Bushmasters at the rear of the convoy know someone is badly injured, but they don't know where he is. The commander of the lead Bushmaster calls out to the medic, "Mate, do you want to grab your kit and go and help him?" And the medic calls back, "He's ready, and get as close as you can." The commandos later described the volume of fire from the Taliban as impressive. The vehicle commander drives the Bushmaster forward to block the fire, getting to the smashed-up SAS vehicle that still appears to be the Taliban's main target. With that protection of the Bushmaster, the medic climbs out through the rear doors and searches for the wounded man. He's able to haul him upright and then to drag him onto a sheltered piece of ground. Other vehicles in the convoy are in trouble, so the Bushmaster moves along the line of vehicles, soaking up the rounds to give the crews an opportunity to regroup. It gave the enemy something large to shoot at, as it was capable of taking it, says the medic. And by then, he's revising his view of the chunky vehicle's value. When the Bushmaster returns to the shot-up patrol vehicle 5 minutes later, it stops with its rear doors facing the wounded man and the soldier who's trying to stabilise him. Further comes more and more grazing fire. They prepare to put the wounded man into the Bushmaster, but every time they put their heads up, they're shot at. Warrant Officer B from the SAS sends the other 2 Bushmasters up to further shield the party from the machine gun fire. The commando medic drags the wounded gunner into the back of his Bushmaster vehicle. Then he and another commando work on him until the Bushmaster is able to reach a safe site, safe enough for a rescue chopper to land. The shooting continues until darkness falls and the convoy returns to camp. The grievously wounded SAS trooper survives and eventually returns to the regiment. By the time they're safely back at their base, the commando's scepticism about the Bushmasters had vanished, says the medic. Without them, a lot of people on that job would be dead. The soldiers who emerged from that ambush were indeed impressed by the strength of the Australian-designed and built Bushy. That's the middle of the story, and I'd like to go right to the beginning of the Bushmaster story. Prior to the Bushmaster, back in 1996, and even as far back as World War II, the Australian infantry did not really have much choice. They had to walk, hitch a ride, sometimes a horse, sometimes hitch a ride with a transport division or other non-specific road vehicles like that Land Rover that got shot up. No vehicle had been specifically designed to carry them anywhere, any time, any terrain, and in any level of war zone. The specification emerged was for an armoured, mine blast protected, all-wheel drive vehicle with all their gear and supplies for 3 days, enough fuel to go 1,000 kilometres, be spacious, air-conditioned and comfortable. But yet it had to be the right size and weight to fit in a Hercules aircraft. So why is there one here at Dad's funeral? It's an interesting choice. And when I was speaking to Michael, he went, "Oh, that's interesting. We've never had one of those at a funeral before." Dad had been doing some other work for the Army, as my sister alluded to, and he had heard of the opportunity to tender for such a vehicle as described. Dad was the sort of engineer who would be given any number of specs and he would design said vehicle or machine from the ground up. Dad was working for Perry Engineering at the time, as my sister stated. He had 6 months to design and build a prototype. He took it to a four-wheel drive track north of Adelaide and got it bogged. But using the built-in winch that he'd already put on it, they were able to get themselves out. They then took it to Canberra and then to Monegetta, the Army test ground. Boral were the current owners of Perry's at that time, and they sub-sold off that section in 1996, and they sold the entire project to the Australian Defence Industries based in Bendigo. ADI twisted Dad's arm, and Dad left Perry's, reluctantly leaving his family behind in Adelaide, and worked for them for the next 3 years. Dad was a FIFO before FIFO was even invented. The design needed revising, and as ADI were as one of the final two in the tender process, the Army wanted 3 vehicles to test, so he started again, and in 9 months they had 3 vehicles ready to go. From the start, the engineers, including Dad, were very conscious that they were designing a vehicle to protect Australian soldiers. Dad said a terrorist could buy an AK-47 for $25, pick up a couple of landmines and a pocket full of bullets, and he's a lethal weapon. Dad also said that if we don't get this right, these terrorists could kill one of these vehicles and kill our 10 people in it. The Army tested those 3 vehicles for 12 months, and in the end, Australian Defence Industries and my dad's design won the order. They took other test vehicles they'd constructed out to a defence firing range at Army's Puckapunyal camp, 96 kilometres north of Melbourne, to ensure that the heat-affected areas alongside the worlds would withstand high-powered rifle fire and that they'd survive bomb blasts. The tyres had run flats in them, so that if they were shot out, the vehicle could still keep driving. Each vehicle is welded together in a neat, unique monocoque style as one large single box. The external spaces created by the crucial V-shaped hull, which you can see on the example outside, were filled with storage lockers and fuel tanks designed to blow off in a blast and take some of the impact. There was still a residual small fuel tank inside the armour of the vehicle that could get the vehicle out of trouble if they were hit. You could still drive yourself out of the killing zone, Dad said. Slide 6. At the testing of the vehicles, before delivery to the Army, they were driven around Bendigo many, many times during the week, but on the weekends, they were often fairly idle. And so Dad decided to some of the long-range testing, well, why not drive it home? So he drove it home to Adelaide, and this is a picture of the Bushmaster, one of the early prototypes, at our family home at Blair. He parked it in our front driveway and caused quite a bit of a stir with all of the neighbours, as you can imagine seeing that, because no one had ever seen one of those vehicles before. He got quite a few looks on the highway as he was cruising at 110, although he says it could go 130, although I'm not sure if he actually stuck to the 110. And in typical Dad way, he described it as going like a rocket. By this time, it was mid-1999, and he turned 65 and he retired. The project continued for a few years before production got started, and by September 2003, there were 300 Bushmasters contracted by Australian Defence Industries for a contract worth $300 million. The vehicle was designed from the ground up by my father, and he also named it the Bushmaster. By 2018, more than 1,000 Bushmasters had been delivered to the Australian Army, with many, several other hundreds sold to numerous other countries for work, including firefighting and UN peacekeeping work. There has obviously been some further internal development and changes, but the original design, which is the life-saving one, that Dad made with his engineering skills remains the same in those vehicles at that time and in the one outside today. Time and again, the Bushmaster has shielded its crews from blasts of bombs, gases and shrapnel, and has more than proved itself of being anything but a humble truck, as it was once described. Although there have been some minor injuries with some slight changes in seat design, thanks to the original unique engineering, the crucial V-shaped hull designed by my dad, the chief engineer, this vehicle has saved thousands and thousands of lives. No one has ever died in a Bushmaster, and Dad described it as his swan song of his career. And hence, once again, I would like to thank the Australian Army for coming here today to honour him. Despite retirement, Dad subsequently was headhunted to do several further heavy machine engineering projects in Melbourne and Mildura, and this time he actually did fly, and he took FIFOing to a new level over the next 10 years of his so-called retirement, well into his 70s. Thank you. I believe the Bushmaster, just before we move on, is going to be out for display afterwards, so if anybody would like to go and have photos with it, you can crawl through it. Our Army representatives have been very gracious in allowing us to do so. Moving on to an entirely different aspect of Dad's life that he did in the latter years, there's a company called Kids Hope. This is an organisation for school-based mentoring program for children experiencing vulnerability. Dad's affiliation and introduction to Kids Hope was set up by Ian Penny from this church. Dad spent several years involved with Kids Hope at Blackwood Primary School, up to and including this year in 2021. And I'd just like to read to you a copy of an email from the National Program Manager from Marg Perry that's sent to me in the last week. Bob was a Kids Hope mentor for many years and connected with several students over that time. Our feedback is that Bob was a very interesting and intelligent man who used his understanding of engineering and design to build rapport with students and engage them in challenging activities. One of his activities included a plastic engine model, no surprise to anyone here, that his mentored students would help to put together. Bob was described as a remarkable man and once met, never forgotten. We are sorry for your loss and hope you draw comfort from knowing how Bob invested and impacted the lives of students at the local Blackwood Primary School. And the third aspect I'd like to talk to you today, which some of you have probably had your ears chewed off at times about, including us, is about Dad's love of radial engines. And you can see in the left-hand picture here is a picture of his kitchen bench at his home at Craigburn Farm with one of his beloved radial engines. And Dad has had a love of building these ever since he was a boy. So what's a radial engine? Well, it's a scale model of an aeroplane or other engines using radial technology. He developed these engines and produced extensive plans for these, as well as constructing the prototypes in his workshop at his house at Craigburn Farm. He formed and created an international business selling these plans to enthusiasts. That business remains an ongoing entity with royalties and plan development that will continue long after his passing. His current business partner is a gentleman called Antonio Silva, who lives in Maryland, USA, and I think is streaming in today. I would like to read an excerpt of his dedication to my dad. An extraordinary engineer, a brilliant mind. I am so sad. Bob, my dear close friend for 11 years and chief engineer and partner for Authentic Scale Engines, has passed away. An extraordinary engineer. Bob has formed the way I think about engineering and manufacturing. We met personally only twice in 2015 and again for the Oshkosh trip in 2017, and he loved the USA. Bob proposed something different from my original business model, with the vision to design and create an entire line of radials and other engine configurations, true internal miniature combustion gasoline engines. We became so very close as time went by. An incredible human heart he had. He was able to deliver to me in 2020 the complete drawings for the master engine, the radial 14 cylinders from which all the others will come, and in the future years. His mind had an incredible way of thinking, total systems integration, as many common parts as possible for all of the engines, right down to the screws, an incredible way to develop an entire line of engines. A true friend, always with sound advice in either personal or business matters, 1 to 2 emails a day, exchanging ideas on the designs. I really got used to being with him. Never thought one day he would be gone. Many times he wrote to me when he was awake at night. He had a better idea how to resolve or design this or that part. Even in his last health issue at the Calvary Hospital, he expressed to Antonio that he was going to redesign his hospital room and get the ducts in the ceiling lined up because they weren't quite to his specifications. And he was obviously still hoping he would come through. An incredible, extraordinary, through and through engineer, an incredible rare breed of a man. I miss him so much already. We became very close friends, always talking about his family visits and issues. Excuse me. His wife Joan, his grandchildren, his tutoring of kids in his school, his work for his church, a true human loving heart. What an incredible blessing I got for 11 years to be with him. In the last years, more like a father to me, working, developing my thinking around engines and engineering and manufacturing. I'm still not sure this has happened. No words are enough to describe his loss. Until we see you again, Bob, my dearest friend, we'll always love you. As Joanne mentioned, one of the great things that my father did, I think partly stemming from his different path in education, was the career encouragement that he showed to his grandchildren and his daughters. And as you may be surprised to know, as Joanne alluded to, he left school at an earlier age and was able to learn his craft at night school and on the job. He constantly encouraged us as his daughters and grandchildren to be the best people that we could be. He encouraged our studies and celebrated every milestone with us. And through his daughters, whom have all gone into various health professions, he went on to help many people. The day before he died, I was sitting in his room in bed 17 at the Calvary Hospital, and there was a MET call to the man in bed 16. I was able to go to this patient and help him before the ICU team got there, and continued to help resuscitate this gentleman in conjunction with the ICU team over the next hour. When I returned to Dad's room, I told him how his encouragement in my career had helped save the man in the very next room, even the day before he died. His parenting of us involved years and years of ferrying to us for various sports, swimming, and universities. Always the parent, even at the age of 84, he got up to drive me to rehab at 6:30 in the morning 3 times a week a couple of years ago when I had a severely broken leg. As Joanne indicated, he loved a lunch from a local bakery, sharing a pie with us, and hence you will understand the afternoon tea that is to follow after this service. I could go on, but I will draw to a close. I love you, Dad. I will miss you forever.
Okay, hello everyone. Another thank you. It's great to see so many of you here, and it'll be nice to catch up with you all properly after the service. Yes, so my name's Emma. I'm Joe's daughter, and today I will be reading a letter from Flo and Ron, who are my great-grandparents. I never met them, but I get to read this letter that they wrote to my grandma and grandpa. It's dated December 1st, 1960, which I believe was around their engagement, just after the wedding. Lovely. I've got a copy of the handwritten letter here, which is in beautiful cursive and written on lovely stationery, but I also have a Word written up version, just because cursive just isn't quite in my vocabulary. So I'll be reading this to you today. Right, so Dear Joan and Bob, Dad and I received your card this morning, and we wish to say we accept your thanks. We would also like you to know that everything we did was with pleasure and happiness, with love and respect for you both, as far as we were concerned. We in turn, Joan, are rewarded by your words of appreciation of your home life with us, for your attitude and loving thoughtfulness to Dad and myself at all times. We treasured you as our daughter, and we know Bob will also treasure you as his wife. To our new son, Bob, we say a sincere welcome. We trust as the years pass that a great respect and understanding grows between us, and that we will think of each other, not as in-laws, but very true, honest friends. We feel sure, Bob and Joan, that you have chosen wisely, and with these few lines are sent our good wishes for a very happy future. May your lives together be honest, useful, and filled with love always. From your loving parents, Mum and Dad, Flo and Ron Wright. I would like to say that not much, apparently. I don't think oh dear, pardon me. I don't think much more can be said about the character of my grandpa. He was an incredible man, and he was so important to us, and I think a lot of us are feeling the disbelief in his passing. And oh dear, we're all going to miss him tremendously, and especially me and my brother and my mum. Grandpa became a central figure in our lives, and he was so important to my brother Hugh. And I don't think if it wasn't for Grandpa, Hugh would be getting off his bum and getting a career. He was always hassling Hugh about getting a job in his degree, which he still hasn't done. And he was so integral when we were moving house and we had that massive life shift. He was essential support for Mum. And he was always so kind to us, all of us grandchildren, and it was always the best when we got to go to Grandpa's house, because he always had a fridge stocked full of ice cream. Napoleon, always. And he would always come over to our house just for very, casual dinners, and it wasn't anything monumentous, but it was just lovely to have him there, and I feel very lucky that he was around for so much of my life, and he'll be with us forever. Thank you.
After those magnificent, varied and moving tributes, we're going to hear another moving tribute, a musical interlude.
Okay, good afternoon, in from Canberra, Melbourne and Noosa. We are Megan, James, Grace and Nick, and today we're going to sing a song honouring our grandpa and for our mum, Elizabeth. It's a song about saying goodbye and about gratitude, and grandpa really enjoyed coming to see us all perform. That we perform for him. It's called For Good. It's from a musical Wicked, and we've only had one rehearsal together, so we'll see how this goes. Please enjoy.
and Joan's trip to the UK and Europe in 2001. Bruce Sartre would meet Bob in person for the first time in 2004 when Bob and Joan had a holiday in the US, visiting New York and going on a bus trip across the country. So for 20 years they've been friends just through snail mail, email, never meeting in person the days before Zoom and FaceTime, etc. But they still have this amazing friendship. Bruce introduced Antonio Silva, as Denise has said, to Bob in 2010 as Antonio was making radial engines, and Bob proposed something different, as Denise has said, and the partnership was born. So Bob, Antonio, Bruce and John continued to correspond many times each week in the years that followed via email. Bruce unfortunately passed away in 2015 before Bob visited the US again in 2016, this time with you. And they had a marvellous trip together, visiting many aviation museums and Cape Canaveral and as well as Las Vegas and lots of tourist stuff as well. But they caught up with John Bogner and Antonio while they were over there, which was great. I won't repeat the next bit because you've already heard it from Denise, so we'll move on. Uncle Bob also made the most of his interest with community as well. He was part of Plus Lunch and Progress, which I'm sure many of you here were part of, and was part of those groups for a very long time. He also helped with the audio-visual needs at the church for many years and videoed many performances for the Gilbert and Sullivan Society of South Australia. He enjoyed researching, so Jane and Denise have referred to this as well. So it didn't matter whether it was how to turbocharge the model engines he was designing or turbocharging his car or the next piece of equipment he was buying, or what I wanted to buy or anyone else. So I would often receive screens of photocopied informational articles from the newspaper or in later years YouTube and webpage links that he wished to discuss together if either of us was considering a purchase. He loved his big screen TVs and would eagerly await the Consumer Electronics Show each year to find out the latest innovations to see if it was time to upgrade again. He believed big is better and encouraged many friends and family to upgrade to the largest TV. So his latest upgrade was a 4K 85-inch TV, which he absolutely loved. And as Joanne said, he enjoyed watching the gritty crime stuff like Online and The Bridge, but he also loved a good romantic comedy like Grace and Frankie or Younger. So it was pretty diverse. In the years from 2001 to 2010, he and Auntie Joan travelled overseas nearly every year. Bob would research the trips, of course, and ensured they got good money for value and fitted in all the sites and visits they wanted to see. They travelled to the USA twice, Canada, UK, Europe, where they loved Paris, New Zealand, Turkey, Russia, Hawaii and the islands, and a cruise around the top end of Australia and China. In 2010 they went to South America, which was Joan's last trip. In 2016, as we said, he went to the US with his grandson Hugh, which was wonderful for both of them. He returned to the US one last time in 2017 for the Oshkosh show. He and John Bogner travelled to the show in John's motorhome and met Antonio Silva there again. So this amazing relationship and partnership with Antonio is based on 2 face-to-face meetings. On most trips when they were travelling, Auntie Joan would take the still photos and Uncle Bob would video. Each of them would carry their camera gear and bum bag with their other gear in a day in a backpack. Uncle Bob would edit the videos on his return, burning DVDs to share with the family. He was very particular about editing, aiming for no longer than 30 minutes for each trip to ensure he did not lose his audience's attention. Late last year, Uncle Bob and I started a project that was very dear to both of us. He had been asked by his granddaughter Rachel to assist her with a school project where she would interview him about an incident in his life. He chose a funny story, which you've heard part of already, about recovering his boss's false teeth that fell into the ocean when he laughed. We talked about all the stories in his life that his family, and particularly his grandchildren, would not know. So we came up with the idea of videoing his life story. So we decided to do it by the decade, and we would gather together the related photos and documents and put these all together for the family, and particularly the grandkids. And I've been given strict instructions in that last week by Uncle Bob to edit each decade down to just the 30 minutes and no more. So unfortunately we weren't able to complete all the videos we had planned. So we will finish the project by videoing his daughters and grandchildren and friends about their recollections. Bob will be greatly missed. I'm going to miss him hugely, but he will never be forgotten.
Hello. Most of you know me, but if not, I am Elsie Sargent. I am one of Bob Roach's grandchildren, and I would like to talk about how good a grandpa he was to me. I remember once Grandpa suggested to help us fix the cubby house roof and taught Dad how to do it as well. Grandpa and Dad made a great fixing crew together. Grandpa remembered us at all times, especially when it was Easter, Christmas and birthdays. He would always give us presents and chocolate Easter bunnies. When my mum, Linda, was growing up, she played netball every single Saturday until she was 25 years old, and Grandpa and Grandma would always come to watch. My mum is now playing netball again, and Grandpa has watched a few matches, including her winning her first ever grand final in 2018. Grandpa was also always very interested to learn how the grandchildren were doing at school. He was a keen attender at all the grandparents' days at school plus childcare. Grandpa would always cheer anyone up when they were sad and appreciate them in every single way. I always thought Grandpa was really funny, like the time when I was 4 years old and we were watching Peter Rabbit, the TV show, and he played Peter Rabbit with me and pretended to be Mr. McGregor. He was really fun. Bob Roach was a fantastic, great, and most importantly, nice grandpa. Thank you, Grandpa, for everything you have ever done.
Wow, there's a lot of people. Okay. I'll try and keep this really short. Grandpa and I went on a trip to America in 2016. I was very privileged for him to invite me on the trip. It started with him seeing an advertisement for a cruise line tour for 10 days from LA down the west coast of America into the Gulf of California and then back to LA. And he said, "Oh, would you like to come with me?" And I said, "Well, sure. Why wouldn't I want to go with you? That'd be great." And not many people ask you to go overseas with them. So I went with him, and then, we planned that trip, and then he said, "Oh, I'm thinking about a few other things." So he came back a week later, and then he said, "Oh, let's go 5 weeks ahead of the cruise and do a big trip through America and basically start in the west coast and then move our way to the east coast and then back." And it ended up being a 5-week trip away with him, which was very special. I'll just read you some highlights that I've thought of just now on the fly about the trip. Grandpa's highlight for the trip was when we went to Cape Canaveral in Florida and seeing NASA. He'd never been there before on his other trips to the United States, and he really enjoyed that. He thought it was really special. Typical man as he is with an engineering background, loved seeing all the rockets in the Saturn V, the lunar module, launch control, and that kind of thing. So he really appreciated that part of the journey. Meeting Antonio's family for me and hearing about his trip and his other previous his engagements with Antonio, meeting his family for lunch that day in Maryland, in Washington. That was beautiful, and I know he's watching today, so how you going, Antonio? So we appreciate that, and his hospitality was brilliant. When we went to San Diego, which was our first stop from the cruise, we went to 3 museums, and I was reading his notes in his diary the other day, and we went to the Museum of Man, which was, I think, a history of human beings, and he said it wasn't very good in his diary. He didn't like it. But then the other 2 were an Air and Space Museum and a model railway one, and he loved that. So it kind of shows you the kind of man he was. We met John and Violet as well at their family home in Salt Lake City. So it was really nice to meet them, and they were very hospitable with their stay there. And I gave Violet some Vegemite, and she really liked it. So pros to that too. Going across the Brooklyn Bridge in New York was a really good highlight for me with Grandpa. Seeing New York was a beautiful place. I'm sure many of you have been there before. And going to Liberty Island and Empire State Building and that kind of thing was brilliant. He walked a lot, and to his credit, he did so much walking in New York, because obviously the city, that's where you do most of your walking. He did say in his diary he was very tired by the last day when we were in New York, so credit to him for making all those journeys on his feet, which was great. On the cruise liner, he loved ice cream, and we would get a lot of ice cream on the cruise ship. One night we were having dinner in like the buffet, like dinner section, and on the menu it said 3 types of ice cream for dessert. And they came out with the dessert, and Grandpa's sitting there and he's eating one by one, and then he tries one of them and he goes, looks a bit funny, and he goes, "This isn't ice cream." And I go, "No, this is ice cream." He says, "No, this is not ice cream." So he brings the waiter over and he says, "Excuse me, this isn't ice cream." And she goes, "Oh no, it's sorbet." And he goes, "Oh, I didn't want sorbet. I wanted 3 types of ice cream." So he made a big point of getting his ice cream. So that was quite funny on the trip for that. But I also beat him at chess on the cruise ship, so I've got one up on him there. So that's something I'll keep with myself too. My favourite part of the whole trip was the Grand Canyon. If any of you have ever seen it, I think that is one of the best things you can see in your life. Very lucky that they have it over there. It is honestly the best natural wonder I've seen in my lifetime, and sharing that with him and being with him there was very special, and I'll never forget that moment in my life. And then we saw the Hoover Dam there too, which was a great engineering marvel, and he really appreciated that there as well. So yeah, that's some of the few things. There's many more things that we could talk about, but I don't want to go on too much. But one thing I will say that Grandpa liked, whenever I introduced my friends to him, he would say, "Oh, I'm Bob," or people call me Old Foddy Doddy. So he liked being referred to as an Old Foddy Doddy, which was funny, and had a good wit and humour, and he was obviously a great man. So I'll miss him very much, and we'll have some pies and pasties. I'm sure he'll appreciate that at the end too. So thank you.
What an extraordinary range of tributes. We have come to the end of the official tributes and eulogies for Bob, but in a brief conversation with daughter Denise before the service, she made a decision which I think Bob would have described as going outside the initial design specifications of the funeral. And that involves me asking, would anyone else like to share memories or reflections about Bob at this point?
Is this in place of what we might say at the afternoon tea?
If you'd like to say something right now, please feel free to come forward.
Gee, there's certainly a good lot of people here. Fantastic. I'm Ralph Dutton. It's obviously a very sad occasion, but as we celebrate Bob's life, I have pleasure in saying a few words about dear Bob on behalf of the Hawthorne Dean Men's Probus Club. I met Bob in January 2013, 6 months after I became a member, when Bob was inducted, having been proposed by Ian Penny, also a member of this congregation. Ian was obviously aware of Bob's incredible past history, his nature and personality. And Bob certainly immediately and easily fitted into our club as a very likeable and highly intelligent gentleman. And I use that word gentleman in the real true sense of the meaning, with a wide range of interests. The club has monthly general meetings which include a guest speaker. From the word go and from the usual 50 or so chaps in attendance, Bob was often amongst the first to ask a question or present a view at the end of the speaker's presentation, especially if there was a technical flavour to that talk. A few times each year, most new members are invited to give a 20 to 30 minute discourse about their life history. Bob's presentation was outstanding, in particular when we learnt about the incredible Bushmaster vehicle created by Bob. I really came to know Bob personally through my role as the Probus Club Outings Coordinator for about the past 7 to 8 years. Up until last year, when COVID-19 pandemic really messed things up, we had 9 monthly events each year with Bob, unless he was away on holidays that we've heard about some of these trips, always putting his name down first on the registration form. Once again, he was to the forefront in asking insightful questions of the tour guides. More often than not, I provided transport for him on these tours, plus with frequent phone calls and many home visits, especially to see and hear his televisions and superb sound system. I got to know and appreciate Bob very well. 2 things I regret. Firstly, not seeing his new television set. He told me so often about it, but I ended up in hospital for quite some time at the beginning of the year, and then when I came out, he spent some time in hospital as well, so I never got a chance to see it. And secondly, not riding in his newest car, that bright red Kia. Bob even had the brake discs, I think they're discs or calipers or something or other, the bits you can see of the brake through the wheel spokes. He even had them, he painted them red. And when I asked why, his reply was, because they look sexy. Not bad for an 80-plus-year-old. Bob always called me Ralphie boy, even though I was only 8 years younger than him. I was chuffed by this term of endearment because my father died over 30 years ago, and I came to regard Bob almost as a father figure to me. Like Bob, my father was a true gentleman, loved by all his multitude of friends from many different walks of life. And Charles Young, a former president of our Probus Club, and I had the privilege of visiting Bob at his request at Calvary only 3 days before he died, in the presence of 3 of his daughters and plus Emma, and I think it's Caleb, I think was there. Charles and I spent about an hour with him, and despite being drowsy from medication, Bob was in typical good form, joining in conversation with us all. I will miss Bob immensely, as will all of the Hawthorne Dean Men's Probus Club members. In my profession as a GP up in the Blackwood area here for over 40 years, plus involvement in many church and sports and professional associations, I've met literally thousands of people, with Bob being one of the nicest and most genuine and most lovable chaps that I've ever met. My best description of Bob is that he was a pure delight. Thank you.
Thank you for all those wonderful tributes. We'll now be watching a visual tribute of Bob's life. With those images evoking your memories of your own individual, unique relationship with Bob, let's sing together our final hymn, To God Be the Glory. There was a single phrase I'm recalling from the many words shared. I'm changed because I knew Bob. After seeing so many images, hearing tributes in music and words, the time has come to say goodbye. Goodbye to Bob. Let's pray. Loving God, as we have come here today from disparate locations, people have been drawn by the common thread of having known Bob. We share a second common linkage, that of a shared human mortality, the knowledge that one day each of us will die. And so it is that we acknowledge the death of Bob, who has joined those who have gone before him, and whom one day we too will join. We stand at the threshold of mystery, a mystery that Bob has now entered. We are, in a way, outsiders, looking in and pondering this mystery. We pray that the mystery and the inevitability of death will draw us ever more deeply into the gift of life, a gift that we live and share on this earth, on this day and at this moment, as we commit the body of Bob Roach to be cremated. As we say our final goodbye to Bob, we give thanks for his life and his love. As Bob enters the eternal mystery, we give thanks for a love that endures. Amen. This concludes our funeral service for Bob Roach. Josh.
Thank you, Pastor Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment I'll ask the pallbearers to come forward, and you're invited to follow the pallbearers, Bob and the family, out to the hearse, where there's a time for you to say your own personal farewell and have a look at this much talked about Bushmaster before the Bushmaster then leads Bob's hearse away from the church. And following that time, please do join the family in the hall for a time of continuing to share your stories and memories. If you're able, would you please be upstanding? Thank you.